European colonialism was not just a political expansion, it was an economic machine engineered to extract wealth, reshape societies, and build global power structures that still influence the world today. When European empires began expanding beyond their borders between the 15th and 20th centuries, their primary motivation was economic gain. Trade routes, resources, and global influence shaped their strategies and policies. Their decisions in Asia, Africa, and the Americas created new economic systems, destroyed existing ones, and laid the foundation for today's global inequality. Understanding these policies is essential to understanding how modern economies evolved and why certain countries remain trapped in cycles of poverty and dependency. At its core, European colonial policy was built on control over land, resources, labor, and markets. Colonizers designed administrative systems that ensured wealth flowed from the colonies to Europe. Local populations rarely had political power, their economies existed to serve European interests. Whether it was British taxation systems in India, French plantation economies in West Africa, or the Belgian rubber extraction model in Congo, the goal was identical: maximize profit with minimum investment. This approach fundamentally reshaped global trade patterns and influenced global capitalism. Trade was the first pillar of colonial economic strategy. European powers initially arrived as traders seeking spices, textiles, gold, and exotic goods. The Portuguese and Spanish built maritime empires, controlling coasts and establishing ports. But soon trade interests turned into territorial ambitions. European nations realized that controlling land meant controlling resources, which ensured long-term economic profits. They built monopolies, forcing colonies to buy only from the mother country and sell raw materials only to Europe. This one-way economic flow created massive wealth in European cities, while the colonies remained underdeveloped and dependent. One of the most damaging economic policies was resource extraction. Colonial economies were designed to export raw materials, such as cotton, sugar, rubber, cocoa, coffee, minerals, and timber. Europe processed these materials into high-value finished goods and sold them back to global markets, including the colonies themselves. This system created value chains where Europe always held the profitable end. Colonies rarely developed local industries because colonizers prevented manufacturing, fearing competition. The Industrial Revolution in Europe grew rapidly because of cheap raw materials and abundant colonial labor. Meanwhile, colonial societies were left with depleted resources, fragile economies, and limited technological advancement. Labor exploitation was another core element of colonial policies. Europeans built their economies using forced labor, slavery, indentured servitude, and unfair taxes that forced people into low-paid work. The transatlantic slave trade was one of the darkest chapters. Millions of Africans were captured and sold to work in plantations across the Americas, generating enormous profits for European economies. Even after the abolition of slavery, colonizers used other systems like the hut tax in Africa, which forced men to work in mines and plantations to earn money for taxes. Labor was seen not as human potential, but as an economic tool. Agricultural transformation was also central to colonial economic structures. Europeans forced monoculture farming in many regions, replacing diverse traditional agriculture with cash crops like sugar, tea, coffee, and cotton. This increased colonial profits but destroyed local food security. Famines became more frequent because lands meant for food production were converted into plantations. The economic priority was export revenue, not human welfare. This created long-term dependency on global markets, a problem many developing nations still face. Infrastructure in colonies was selectively developed. Europeans built railways, ports, and roads primarily to transport raw materials to the coast for export, not to connect local communities or support domestic trade. Rail lines were designed to move goods from mines and plantations to ships, not to integrate national economies. As a result, even after independence, many countries inherited infrastructure that served extraction, not development. This remains a major obstacle to modern economic growth. Taxation policies were another tool to control colonial economies. European administrators imposed taxes on land, crops, livestock, and even household items. These taxes forced people into the cash economy, undermining traditional barter systems and local economic structures. Taxes were often used to fund colonial administration, making colonies pay for their own exploitation. Heavy taxation discouraged local entrepreneurship and made colonial subjects financially dependent on the foreign state. Another key feature of colonial economic policy was the creation of social and economic classes. Europeans favored certain ethnic groups for administrative or military roles while marginalizing others. This created artificial hierarchies that fractured societies. In many colonies, access to land, business licenses, and education was restricted to a minority. These divisions made it easier for colonizers to rule, but they also created deep inequalities that persist today. Economic opportunities were not distributed based on talent, but on loyalty to colonial power. Education was shaped by economic motives. Colonizers rarely invested in widespread education, fearing an educated population would resist. Instead, they created limited schooling systems, producing low-level clerks, interpreters, and assistants for colonial administration.